Maddie, you think I'm blind? You're sleeping with my husband, and you're digging into my son's pockets like I wouldn't notice. I stood right in front of her, watching that sweet, innocent mask of hers crack apart, second by second, while Thomas's SUV sat shamelessly in the driveway, filthy proof, bold and undeniable. But just seconds later, everything collapsed right in front of me. Her purse slipped, and a tiny recording device tumbled out, automatically playing the sentence that froze my whole body. As soon as he signs one more time, all the money will flow straight into our pockets. In that moment, I realized I wasn't looking at a daughter-in-law, but a woman ready to destroy my son's future with the same fake smile she used to fool us all. If it were you, would you stay silent or show her what real consequences look like? Would you dare listen to what comes next when she reveals something even more disgusting? If you want the full story, hit subscribe and comment "Continue, Alicia," so I can tell you everything. I'm Alicia Bennett, 65 years old, dark-skinned African-American, a businesswoman who has weathered enough storms to know how to stand firm, yet not hardened enough to stop feeling. I can negotiate million-dollar deals and stay calm through the most brutal boardroom battles, but family has always been my softest spot. I loved it like breath itself, like the one thing left after decades of running and surviving. My son Evan is the pride of my life. When he brought Maddie home and she called me Mama Bennett, something inside me melted. I believed I was blessed with a gentle, gracious daughter-in-law. She asked me about recipes, traditions, and family stories. I loved her like my own child. I trusted her completely. That morning, I woke with a strange feeling, light, vague, but persistent, like something was about to shift. I entered the kitchen, packed the warm peach cobbler Maddie adored, and decided to stop by her place. I imagined us sitting over tea, talking about life. I thought it would be a sweet, quiet morning. But sometimes life only needs one turn to tear everything open. As I turned onto her street, the morning sun washed over her front yard, calm and peaceful enough to make me smile. Until my eyes locked onto the thing sitting in her driveway, a silver SUV, Thomas's SUV. I stopped cold. My heart felt like it took a blow straight to the center. The world tilted slightly. No, it couldn't be another car. It couldn't be a coincidence. I tried to convince myself, but years of experience taught me that denial never saves you from what's already real. Thomas's SUV sat there in my daughter-in-law's driveway, clean, polished, unmistakable. A cold wave slid down my spine, sharp as a blade. I didn't come here to investigate. I came with dessert. But the sight of that car dragged me toward the door as if something had seized my hand. Each step felt heavier than the last. I could feel the tremor in my palms, though I tried to hold on to the composure that had carried me through decades of business crises. I knocked. No answer. I tried the handle. It opened. Inside, the smell hit me. First Maddie's perfume mixed with Thomas's cologne. A scent I had tolerated for years, now twisted into something vile. It slapped me harder than any truth could. I walked straight to the kitchen, drawn by a sound. Maddie turned around, eyes widening, her face freezing for a split second before she plastered on a smile. "Oh, Mama Bennett, I didn't expect." I cut her off. I didn't need to hear lies warming up on her tongue. I looked straight into her eyes, and she stiffened under my stare, the stare of a woman who had lived long enough to recognize when someone is wearing a mask. I spoke each word, shattering the air like glass. "Maddie, you think I'm blind? You're sleeping with my husband, and you're digging into my son's pockets like I wouldn't notice?" The kitchen went dead silent. Maddie's face paled for a heartbeat, but her eyes flashed with something far uglier: anger at being caught. I had once loved her like a daughter. Now all I saw was a stranger, a knife wrapped in silk. As my words hung in the air, her hand jerked, and her purse slipped from her shoulder, crashing onto the tile floor. The contents spilled open. Something small slid out, spinning once before stopping at my feet. A voice recorder. The light blinked on. A soft beep echoed through the room, mocking me, mocking my trust, mocking the years I had embraced her like family. I looked at the device. Then at Maddie. Then I heard my own breathing, sharp and uneven. In that instant, I knew this visit would not be the warm, gentle morning I imagined. This was the moment everything in my life was about to split apart, and the path ahead would have no return. I froze as the small recorder spun across the kitchen floor and stopped. The quiet morning inside Maddie's house suddenly dimmed, as if the shadow of the truth had crept through every corner. I had prepared myself for the worst when I walked in, but I never imagined the confrontation would come like this, sharp and ruthless as a needle stabbing straight into my chest. Maddie bent down to pick it up, but the soft beep made me instinctively step back. That tiny sound felt like a landslide crashing through my mind. I wasn't sure if I wanted to hear what was inside, yet my hand moved on its own and turned the device on, as if pulled by something unseen. The silence in the kitchen thickened, like even the walls were holding their breath. Then Thomas's voice came out, deep, familiar, but carrying something that crawled cold along my spine. As long as he signs one more time, the money will flow straight into our pockets. It felt like something heavy had slammed into the back of my skull. I gripped the counter just to stay upright. His tone wasn't hesitant. It wasn't accidental. It was deliberate, calculated, confident, the way he spoke during business deals. He wasn't talking about an affair. He was talking about stealing from my son. My heartbeat thudded painfully. This wasn't a slip-up. It wasn't weakness. It was premeditated. I looked at Maddie. She didn't flinch. Her lips tightened slightly, but her eyes held no panic, only annoyance at being caught. The woman who once called me Mama Bennett was gone. What stood before me was someone else entirely. The recording wasn't done. Let her think you care about the family. Make her trust you, and the paperwork will go through faster. I felt the room tilt. Every conversation Maddie had with me, every sweet gesture, every question about Evan, every touch of her hand on mine, every one of them was a snare. My voice trembled inside my skull, not out loud. The man I called my husband and the woman I called my daughter working together to steal from my son Evan, it was a blade shoved straight through my chest. I couldn't tell how long I stood frozen. Pain, humiliation, fury, all competing to drown me. Then Maddie spoke. "So now you know." And what? Her voice was flat, cold. There was no remorse in her face, only the icy confidence of someone who believed she still held control. I stared at her, and for the first time, I saw what lay behind her softness. A predator's stare, calculating, sharp, assessing whether I was a threat. She knew I had heard everything. I saw a flicker in her eyes, and it wasn't fear. It was the glint of someone deciding what to do with an inconvenient witness. I stepped back slowly, keeping my breath steady. I had survived too many storms in my life to crumble here. I didn't need more answers. What I heard was more than enough. Without a word, I turned toward the door. My footsteps were heavy but controlled, each one hammering down the last fragments of trust I had once held. My hand touched the doorknob, and in the stretched silence, I felt Maddie's stare burning into my back. Not anxious, not pleading, a stare that examined me the way someone looks at a problem they need to eliminate. A stare that told me she had already begun imagining ways to silence me. As I opened the door and stepped outside, a chill swept down my spine. This wasn't the end. This was the beginning of something far darker. I drove home like someone who had just crawled out of a storm no one warned her about. The road in front of me blurred, not because of tears, but because a tight, suffocating pressure had wrapped itself around my chest. When I stepped inside my house, my eyes immediately met the family photos on the living room wall, the ones I once considered the pride of my life, the evidence that I had fought for 20 years to keep our home intact. I sat on the couch staring at each picture, as if they were pieces of memory thrown into the air and falling back in the wrong places. In one photo, Thomas held me on a beach during summer. In another, Maddie stood between Evan and me, her hand resting on my shoulder like a real daughter. Those faces used to comfort me. Now, each photo felt like a razor slicing through my skin, peeling off every layer of trust I had built across decades. The evening light spilled across the wall, stretching the shadows of each frame like silent witnesses to the betrayal I had just uncovered. My fingertips touched our wedding photo. The cold glass met my skin, and somehow that coldness burned inside my chest. It felt like I had placed my hand on the ice, sealing a grave that had never been buried properly. Thomas's voice from the recording echoed in my skull, as if he was whispering behind me. His words clung to me like a noose, tightening inch by inch. I found myself staring into an abyss, realizing he had been standing there for a long time, waiting for the moment I finally reached the edge. I didn't know how long I sat there, the silence pressing in on me like walls closing in. I knew he'd come home eventually, and tonight would mark the death of everything I used to believe about marriage and family. Just after dusk, I heard the familiar hum of the engine outside. I kept my eyes on the photos, those silent witnesses surrounding me. Then Thomas walked in, dragging along the scent of gardenia, a scent I once thought was sweet because it reminded me of the perfume I gifted Maddie. Now it stuck to him like a confession he didn't bother to wash off. The door clicked shut. My heartbeat stuttered. "Alicia, what's wrong?" His voice sounded gentle, even concerned. A well-practiced performance he had perfected over the years. But his face, his eyes, the slight tension in his jaw, all of it betrayed a man who knew more than he wanted to reveal. I didn't answer. I stood up and met his gaze head-on. "You really think everyone around you is blind, don't you?" He froze just for a second before forcing a tired smile. "Baby, you're misunderstanding again. I was meeting a client. Gardenia is—" I cut him off before he could spit out another lie. Even his breath disgusted me. "Gardenia is Maddie's perfume. The same scent you brought home from her bedroom." His jaw tightened. He tried to keep calm, like he was negotiating with a stubborn investor. But I caught that tiny twitch in his neck, the reflex of a man who realizes the ground beneath him just cracked open. The air thickened until I felt like even a strand of hair falling to the floor could echo in the silence. I looked into his eyes and finally saw what I had always avoided. He never loved me enough to stay loyal. In that instant, something inside me shifted. The pain didn't disappear, but it hardened into something sharper, a clarity I hadn't allowed myself to feel. I thought I would cry, but all that remained was a single thought pulsing through my heart. This ends now. Thomas stepped forward, trying to put his hand on my shoulder. I stepped back, and in that single step, his whole body stiffened. He recognized it, the shift in me, the part of me he no longer controlled. I stared at him, feeling like I was looking at a ghost pretending to breathe. I heard everything, Thomas. He opened his mouth, but I didn't give him the chance. Everything. I walked away from him. I climbed the staircase, each step echoing like nails being hammered into a coffin lid. He called my name from below, but I didn't turn back. His voice was different now, lower, tight, tinged with fear. The fear of a man who felt something slipping out of his grasp. I reached the hallway and stood before the door to his home office, the forbidden room, the one he never let me touch, the place filled with documents, secrets, and conversations I was never meant to hear. My hand landed on the doorknob. I turned it. The door opened, and the first thing I saw inside that room made me stop cold at the doorway, my heartbeat thundering as if I had just stepped into the den of something far darker than I ever imagined, living under my own roof. The door to Thomas's office hung open under my hand, the faint evening light spilling into a room I had been forbidden from entering for 20 years. I stood for a moment on the threshold, staring into the space that had always been locked away from me like a sealed chamber inside my own home. The air felt cold and heavy, as if every secret Thomas buried here had thickened it into something almost physical. I stepped inside and flipped on the dim yellow lamp. Certificates lined the walls, awards Thomas had flaunted as symbols of his success. Yet none of them looked clean anymore. Every frame felt tainted, like a polished shell hiding something rotten beneath. My eyes drifted to the small safe in the corner. It was locked, but my hand automatically moved toward the place where I kept the spare key. I took down the wedding photo, slid my fingers behind the frame, and pulled out the old, slightly rusted key. Holding it felt like gripping the handle of a knife I was about to turn against my own past. The key clicked softly. The safe opened. Inside lay a thick stack of documents arranged too neatly, as if Thomas had spent far too much effort making them look untouched. I lifted the first folder. Rows of numbers leapt out at me, suspicious transfers, signatures I had never seen, accounts I never knew existed. Then, an email printed in bold type caught my eye. Speed up the transfer. I'll handle Alicia. My name sitting in the middle of those words felt like a slap. I dropped into his desk chair, my breath catching in my throat. Thomas wasn't simply betraying me, he was removing me from his way, treating me like an obstacle he needed to clear. I flipped through other pages. One section of the file cabinet was empty, leaving behind a clean rectangle of dust. A missing bundle of documents. Someone had removed it recently. Thomas wasn't just hiding things from me. He was hiding something bigger from someone else, too. Maybe Maddie, maybe both of them. I scanned the other shelves. More files missing. Contracts I remembered seeing months ago were gone. A thick envelope I once glimpsed had vanished. Everything pointed to one truth. Thomas was preparing for the day his lies collapsed, and he was still trying to cover his tracks. I pulled out another email. Next step is on you. Make sure Evan suspects nothing. He trusts you. Use that. Don't let Alicia be home that night. My grip tightened until the edges of the paper sliced my skin. I thought I had reached the bottom of my pain in Maddie's kitchen. I was wrong. That moment was only the first step down a staircase that descended into something far darker. I stood, legs trembling but steadying with every breath. My eyes swept the room one more time, taking in the bookshelves, the locked drawers, the laptop sleeping on the desk. This office was a nest of venom, and I was standing in the very center of it. Evan appeared in my mind, his gentle smile, his absurd faith in Maddie. My chest tightened until it hurt. Rage rose like fire, but instead of exploding, it condensed into something sharper, colder, more precise. I needed to stay ahead of them. I gathered every document that mattered: emails, transfer records, altered contracts. I placed them into my leather bag, the one Thomas always mocked for looking too cheap. The irony almost made me laugh. With the bag secured, I headed for the door. My fingers landed on the handle. The metal vibrated faintly, like it sensed what waited on the other side. I pulled the door open and froze. Someone was standing right outside the room. I couldn't mistake the breathing, steady and controlled, and it wasn't Thomas. A chill ran down my spine. Whoever it was had been waiting for me. Rainwater dripped from the stranger's coat, tapping onto the hallway tiles like a countdown. I froze behind the half-open door, my hand gripping the bag of evidence so tightly my fingers felt numb. The man stood tall in the dim light, his face sharp, his eyes carrying a mixture of urgency and something deeper, something that told me he wasn't here by chance. He wasn't Thomas, not someone I knew. Yet he looked at me like he already understood what I was holding in my hands. "My name is Gabriel Ross. I know what you're looking for." His voice was low and steady, not the voice of someone who came to threaten me. I didn't move, watching every shift in his posture. Gabriel slowly raised his hands to show he meant no harm, then stepped forward into the warm stream of light spilling from the office. "I'm not here to scare you," he said. "I'm here to help." Rainwater kept dripping from his sleeves, each drop echoing through the silent hallway like the warning before a storm breaks. There was something about the way he looked at me, something painfully familiar, as if he too had once watched his life collapse under someone else's hands. "Why do you say you know what I'm looking for?" I asked. Gabriel looked directly into my eyes, exhaustion and conviction blending inside his gaze. "Because you're walking the same path I once did. Thomas destroyed my life too, just like he's about to destroy yours and your son's." A shiver shot down my spine. Gabriel entered the office, scanning the room for a moment before speaking again. 2 years ago, he said I was the only person in the company brave enough to expose him. I discovered he was funneling money from the investment funds into private accounts. I reported him to the board. He paused, looking off into the corner as if the memory still haunted him. 3 days later, I was fired. My records were tampered with, my reputation ruined, every job prospect gone. And when I tried to defend myself, Thomas used money, connections, even Maddie to shut every door in my face. I felt my chest tighten. So the destruction Thomas caused stretched far beyond my family. Gabriel continued. I lost everything, but I kept one thing: evidence. From his coat, he pulled out a small black USB drive and placed it on Thomas's desk beside the stack of documents I had just gathered. "This contains everything: video recordings, audio files, transaction logs, falsified contracts. And most importantly," he looked straight into me, "a recorded conversation of Thomas and Maddie discussing how to steal your son Evan's money. They weren't just betraying him, they were planning to ruin him." My knees weakened. I had to steady myself against the desk. The truth was too heavy, too monstrous. Gabriel stepped closer, his voice firm but not unkind. "I know it's hard to hear, but you need to stay strong. What they're planning isn't betrayal. It's a crime that will haunt generations." I picked up the USB. My hand was freezing, my heart too full of pain, fury, and a new feeling rising from beneath the wreckage. Power. The power of knowing the truth. The power to fight back. Gabriel watched me quietly. "I'll help you," he said, "because you're fighting for something I lost." I nodded, breath sharp and trembling. "Thank you. I won't back down." I placed the USB into my leather bag next to the documents from the safe. Together, they formed a map of the darkness Thomas and Maddie had built around my family. Before I could speak again, my phone buzzed. A message appeared from an unknown number, a short sentence that sliced straight through me. Stop. Your son will die first. My body locked. Gabriel leaned in to read the message with me. His expression shifted instantly, eyes sharpening like steel. You need to leave this house right now, he said. But his voice faded beneath the roar inside my skull. Those words repeated again and again, each time hitting harder. Evan. They were going after Evan. I tightened my grip on the phone, breath shaking as if the air had suddenly disappeared. Then, from downstairs, a sound echoed through the house, sharp, quick, unmistakably human. Someone was inside, and it wasn't Thomas. The sound rising from the floor below echoed upward, cold as metal. Gabriel gestured for me to stay still, but my heart pounded painfully as the threat about Evan repeated in my head like a drum. I stepped toward the railing, looking down into the dim living room, where the faint yellow light trembled along the walls and a shadow moved past the front door. A loud knock hit the door, sharp and forceful. Gabriel leaned forward and murmured, "It's the police." I stiffened. The police at this hour? I walked downstairs, stopping halfway when I saw two officers waiting at the door, their patrol lights flashing across the floor like restless ghosts. "Mrs. Alicia Bennett?" one officer asked. I nodded. "We received a complaint saying you've been harassing and threatening your daughter-in-law, Maddie Bennett." My chest tightened. Maddie had made her move. I swallowed the burn in my throat and tried to answer. "That's a lie." Before I could finish, Maddie stepped into the doorway from outside. Her arms were folded, her eyes swollen red, her face arranged into a perfect picture of fear and exhaustion under the flashing lights. "Mom," her voice trembled thin and shaking, "I'm scared of you." I stared at her, every muscle tightening. The officers glanced at me, then back at Maddie, already weighing her performance over any truth I might offer. One officer asked, "Do you feel threatened by her?" Maddie nodded quickly, breath hitching. She said, "She'd destroy my family. She came to my house yelling, breaking things. I don't know what she wants to do next." My voice caught. The image of Evan shattered by these two monsters flickered in my mind with a pain that cut deep. The officer placed a hand near his holster. "Mrs. Bennett, we may need you to come with us to clarify this situation." I straightened, fighting to steady myself. I could not leave now. I had evidence to protect. I had Evan to protect, and Maddie knew that. She stepped closer, lowering her head like she was too afraid to look at me, and moved until her face was inches from mine. In the shadow of her hair, her voice shifted into a whisper laced with poison. "If you say a word, Evan dies first." The words hit me like molten iron. I trembled, not from fear of her, but from the terror of losing my son. A second later, she pulled back, tears instantly returning to her eyes as if the threat never happened. The police glanced between us confused but unable to see the truth. "Mrs. Bennett, please avoid contact with your daughter-in-law until the case is reviewed." I nodded slowly. "Fine." Maddie sniffed and leaned toward one of the officers like a fragile child seeking comfort. "I just want peace in this family." If I wasn't holding back the storm inside me, I might have laughed. Peace was the first thing she destroyed. When the door finally closed behind them, silence crashed down over the house. I placed a hand on my chest, trying to pull my breath together. Gabriel appeared at the top of the stairs, his eyes sharp. "You see it now?" he said. "They're cornered. When people like them have no way out, they become dangerous." I nodded. Inside me, something fierce was rising. Maddie and Thomas had shown their true faces. They wanted me gone before I could bring them down. I looked at Gabriel. "This isn't a family anymore," I said. "This is a battlefield." He didn't argue. His expression held the weight of someone who recognized when a woman crossed from fear into resolve. I went back upstairs, opened my leather bag, and checked the documents and the USB. Each sheet carried a truth they wanted buried. There was no room left for hesitation. As I prepared to lock everything away, my phone vibrated sharply. Lucas, my attorney, was calling. I answered. "Alicia," he said, "listen carefully. We have enough evidence to take them to criminal court." My heart kicked hard against my ribs. "But there's more," Lucas continued. "Their case is tied to a larger scheme. I'm afraid they may have hired someone to monitor you." I gripped the phone. "Hired? Who?" Silence stretched. Then Lucas exhaled. "Possibly the same person who sent the threat about Evan." A sudden bang shook the front door downstairs. Gabriel's shoulders tightened. Another hit followed, louder, harder. Whoever was outside no longer intended to knock. Someone was trying to break into my house. I sat at Lucas's desk as the computer screen reflected the final documents back at us. Pages filled with traces of fraud, bank transfers, hidden contracts, forged signatures. Every line was a blade carving into my past. Yet, at the same time, it was the very weapon that would finally drag two traitors out into the light. Lucas signed the last page, and Gabriel stood beside him, his eyes heavy with the years Thomas had crushed his career. The three of us looked at the completed file as if it were the key that would shatter the darkness surrounding my family. When Lucas closed the folder and placed it in his briefcase, he spoke with a quiet firmness. "Charges include fraud, money laundering, and asset misappropriation. We have enough to pursue a criminal case." I nodded. My hand trembled slightly, but my eyes stayed sharp. That file wasn't just paperwork. It was evidence, a weapon, the voice of truth I had chosen to stand with until the end. And in that moment, I finally understood I was no longer walking alone. Gabriel was at my side, a man once destroyed by Thomas, now rising as my strongest ally. Lucas was the legal shield I needed, and I was the witness carrying the weight of betrayal. Together, our light began to push back the shadows that had suffocated us. That afternoon, Thomas received the court summons. When he stormed into my yard with his face burning red, I realized the man standing before me was no longer the husband I once knew. He was a cornered animal, stripped of his mask and scrambling for control. He shouted across the porch, "Alicia, you don't know who I am." I answered with a calm that cut deeper than rage. "And you have no idea who I have become." He froze. His anger couldn't penetrate the steadiness in my voice. He stared at me as though seeing me for the first time, no longer the woman who endured, forgave, or stayed silent. He stepped back, swallowed hard, and walked away in a stiff attempt to hide his panic. As he disappeared down the driveway, I felt the final thread between us snap. This wasn't just a man who cheated. This was a man who betrayed his own son, conspired to destroy Evan's future, and believed he would never be caught. He had turned into the greatest threat to the family he once vowed to protect. Later that evening, Maddie showed up. Her usual sugary tone was gone, her face hollow, her eyes darting around like a trapped animal. She stood on my porch, gripping her sleeves as if afraid I would slam the door in her face. "Mom, Alicia," she whispered, her voice cracked. "I don't want to lose everything." I looked straight at her. For a moment, I remembered why I once loved her like a daughter. But the image of Evan rose in my mind. My son who trusted her, who loved her, who had no idea she had poisoned our home from the inside. "Maddie," I said, "at this point, everything that's happening is the result of your choices." She lowered her head, fear rising like steam around her. She knew it was over. She knew the case had been filed and the truth was irreversible. Her tears fell, not crafted, not rehearsed, just the cold sting of consequences arriving too late. But I didn't reach out to comfort her. I wasn't there to save someone who had driven a knife into the heart of my family. The light I chose would burn away all the shadows she created. When she stepped off my porch, her steps tangled beneath her, tripping over her own lies. Minutes later, Lucas called. His voice was crisp, steady, and firm. "Alicia, the court has accepted the documents. The trial is officially set." The morning the trial opened, the air inside the courtroom was thick, heavy enough to choke anyone who stepped in. I sat in the front row, Lucas beside me, and Gabriel a few seats behind, keeping distance but always within sight. Across from us, Thomas walked in, wearing a crisp suit, his face calm, so calm that if someone didn't know the truth, they might mistake him for a devoted husband falsely accused. Maddie followed closely behind him, head slightly bowed, her pale face arranged into the expression of a fragile, wronged daughter-in-law. Thomas leaned toward her, whispering something, and she immediately nodded, her eyes filling with tears at the perfect cue. I watched them, feeling a slow spike of cold recognition moving down my spine. They still believed they could control the narrative. They still believed a few performative tears could wash away everything they'd done. Their attorney stood up first, voice steady and arrogant. "My client, Mr. Thomas Bennett, is a devoted husband and exemplary father. The accusations against him are built on misunderstandings and falsified documents." I didn't react. Thomas kept the same frozen calm, occasionally squeezing Maddie's hand as if he were the victim in this entire disaster. When it was Maddie's turn, she slipped into character flawlessly. "I never thought Mother Alicia would hate me this much. I've always treated her like my real mother." She wiped tears, voice trembling. "I don't understand why she wants to destroy my family." I stared straight at her. For a split second, her eyes flickered, fear cracking through her performance. Then Lucas rose, sharp and direct. "Your Honor, the prosecution would like to present the first piece of evidence." He placed the USB from Gabriel onto the evidence table. A brief silence swallowed the room. Then the audio played. Thomas's voice echoed through the speakers, every word cutting like a blade. "Once he signs one more time, all the money goes straight into our pockets." A wave of gasps spread through the gallery. Heads turned toward Thomas and Maddie. Shock rippled across the room like a sudden storm. Thomas's jaw tightened. Maddie's hands turned rigid from gripping each other too hard. Their attorney shot up, shouting, "This recording could be tampered with." Lucas didn't flinch. "In that case, let's bring in the person who can verify its authenticity." The courtroom doors opened. Gabriel stepped inside. Light from the hallway framed him, and instantly every eye shifted his way. Some recognized him. Whispers rose about the scandal 2 years ago when Thomas used his influence to ruin Gabriel's career. Gabriel approached the witness stand, calm and steady. "I am the one who recorded that audio." And here he lifted a stack of original documents, are the full transcripts of transactions, private meetings, and falsified contracts tied to the plan to steal Evan Bennett's inheritance. The room erupted, gasps, murmurs, disbelief. The judge's gavel slammed down, demanding order. Thomas jerked to his feet, pointing at Gabriel. "You set all this up. You want revenge." Gabriel remained unmoved. "I'm only bringing the truth to where it belongs." Maddie began to tremble, makeup cracking, the mask slipping. "I didn't know. Thomas made me." Lucas stepped forward with precision. "Your Honor, we request to play the second recording." A woman's voice echoed through the speakers, cold and unmistakable. Maddie's voice. "You handle Alicia. I'll handle Evan. He trusts me. Easy to manipulate." Maddie collapsed into her chair, covering her mouth, fake tears gone, sweat sliding down her temples. The judge requested silence again. "We will review all evidence thoroughly." The atmosphere thickened. I looked at Thomas. He glared back, rage mixed with the dread of a man who finally realizes he is cornered. Maddie stared at the table, shoulders folding inward as her world crumbled. The judge opened the final folder. Every sound in the room disappeared. His lips parted. He was about to deliver the criminal verdict. The courtroom fell silent when the judge returned. Every step he took echoed like a funeral bell. I straightened my back, a cold sensation running along my spine as I looked at Thomas and Maddie. Thomas's face had gone pale, and Maddie bit her lip until it bled. Behind me, Gabriel held the stack of documents tightly, while Lucas leaned slightly toward me, reminding me that I was no longer alone. The judge opened the case file, his voice sharp and decisive. "After reviewing all evidence, original documents, witness statements, and valid recordings, the court rules." Everyone in the room leaned forward, breath held. Defendant Thomas Bennett is sentenced to 12 years in prison for money laundering, fraud, and misappropriation of Evan Bennett's assets. A sound like something breaking escaped Maddie. Thomas exploded, gripping the edge of the table as if he intended to leap toward the judge, but officers were already prepared. His face contorted with rage, his eyes slicing toward me like they wanted to rip me apart. I stood still. The more he struggled, the clearer it became how far he had fallen from truth. The judge continued. Defendant Maddie Sanders is sentenced to 8 years in prison for being an accomplice in financial fraud and abusing Evan Bennett's trust to carry out theft. Maddie collapsed onto her chair, covering her mouth, sobbing uncontrollably. She turned toward me, desperation shaking in her eyes as if pleading for a miracle. But miracles had run dry the day she betrayed the very family that took her in. The judge allowed me to speak as the family representative. I stepped forward, each step heavy with 20 years of shattered trust. When I faced them, something cold and steady wrapped around my voice. "Thomas, Maddie," I said, "I didn't come here to curse you. The law already did that for me." Thomas's lips tightened, rage simmering behind his eyes. Maddie trembled. "I want you to understand one thing," I continued. "Prison will lock up your bodies, but your own lives will lock up your souls forever." A ripple ran across the courtroom. I heard someone gasp, heard Maddie choke on another sob, and saw Thomas turn his head away as if my words burned him. The judge announced the end of the trial. Officers stepped forward. The click of the handcuffs echoed like metal dropping into a deep well, cold and final. Thomas was yanked upright, hands bound behind him. He tensed, but the cuffs held him in place, forcing him to bow his head. Maddie was restrained next, eyes vacant, mascara smeared down her cheeks. They were both escorted through the packed courtroom. The harsh overhead lights exposed every ounce of their downfall, stripping away the illusions they had used to deceive and destroy. I watched them, not with joy or sorrow, but with the quiet certainty that a long chapter in my life had finally closed. As Maddie passed me, she looked back one last time. What remained in her eyes was pure fear, fear of being trapped forever inside the very web she helped weave. Officers dragged them through the back exit. The sea wind brushed across the porch of my small wooden house, the scent of salt water settling lightly on my skin, carrying a newness I once believed I'd never feel again. I left the city after the trial, leaving behind the wreckage, Thomas's furious shouts, Maddie's broken sobs, and the entire tragedy they had dug for themselves. The place I chose to live was a quiet coastal town, waves rolling in and out, and every afternoon the sunlight rested on my deep brown skin like a whispered revival. On those first mornings there, I woke up to the endless stretch of ocean and let peace settle into my lungs. I placed a wooden chair on the porch, holding a cup of warm tea. The steam drifted into the breeze, slowing everything around me. In 48 years of living, I had never felt this level of calm. No more lies, no more Maddie's fake sweetness, no more perfume clinging to Thomas's shirts. Only the sea and the peace I had fought with everything in me to reclaim. One late afternoon, as the sun sank behind streaks of purple clouds, a knock echoed at the door. I turned and saw Gabriel standing at the gate, his dark coat touched with ocean mist, a faint smile on his face. I wasn't surprised he found me. Ever since he handed me the USB that exposed the truth, there was a bond between us, two people who had walked through the dark and chosen to return to the light. "Alicia," Gabriel said as he stepped into the yard, "you're stronger than they ever imagined." I set my cup down, smiling quietly. I only stood up at the moment they were certain I would fall. Gabriel's smile deepened, his eyes filled with something like respect. "We ended this," he said, "and you won, not just in court, but in the way you kept your integrity." I looked at the sea. The water shimmered like a mirror, reflecting everything I lost and everything I found again. "No one wins by destroying others," I said. "I didn't seek revenge. I just put the truth back where it belonged." Gabriel nodded. "The wicked went to prison. The good finally got peace. The court judged their crimes, but life will judge their souls." His words lingered in me. I stepped closer to the porch edge, where the last light of the day washed over my skin with a warm glow. "I won," I whispered, "with the truth." A gust of wind swept through the yard, spinning a few dried leaves at my feet. Gabriel prepared to leave, and I turned back into the house to put away my tea. Just as the door closed, something brushed against my toe. I looked down. A brown envelope lay beneath the doormat, the corner slightly bent as if pushed in by the sea breeze. On it was a single line of ink black, sharp and chillingly familiar. "Alicia, this isn't over." I froze. The waves outside still crashed in their steady rhythm, yet my heartbeat skipped violently. The envelope felt cold in my hand, like the ashes of a fire I thought had been completely extinguished. I tightened the envelope in my hand. The waves still crashed, but they no longer sounded like a lullaby. They sounded like a warning. If whoever sent this wanted me to be afraid, they picked the wrong woman. I've already taken down monsters far bigger than them. And if the night is preparing to open a new chapter filled with danger, then I'll step into it before they ever get the chance to reach me.